Hello. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Laura Mott. I'm the chief curator here at Cranbrook Art Museum, and it is my honor today to bring you this presentation in relationship to the shows upstairs, A Modernist Regime, Cuban Mid-Century Design, Cuba Dispersa, and Marco Castillo, The Hands of the Collector. So this project started for me about 6 or 7 years ago. I was a Warhol Curatorial Fellow for an exhibition I did in 2019 called Landlord Colors on Art, Economy, Materiality. And that was my, part of that fellowship was traveling and doing research in Cuba for that show. And I've been to Cuba many subsequent times, but that first time in late 2017, early 2018 is what kind of birthed this next project. And I was in the studio of Marco Castillo, and I was sitting on some chairs that I didn't recognize. And I was like, what are these chairs? And he told me that he had been collecting Cuban mid-century design, and that, of course, is fascinating to us here at Cranbrook because we're such an important place in America for mid-century design. And I think it's part of our mission to not only celebrate what we do, but also really expand the canon of design and diversify the canon. So that was what really led us to a deep, sincere interest in this. And during that first trip also, I met Abel González Fernández, who would later become my co-curator for the exhibitions upstairs. And at the same time, working closely with Marco over the years, really understanding his practice and a kind of deep fascination of his relationship to the design objects leading to the bodies of work. I'm going to thank some very important people who actually make everything possible for these shows. Again, I said the exhibitions upstairs are curated by Abel González Fernández and myself, with Andrew Sataki Blavelt, our director, and Andrew Rouse de Perez, the former Jean and Ralph Graham Curatorial Fellow. The exhibitions are generally supported by the Gilbert Family Foundation, the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Clannad Foundation, the George Francoeur Art Museum Exhibition Fund, Mark Schwartz and Emily Kamir, Karen and Drew Bacon, Jennifer and Brian Hermelin, Kelsey and Evan Ross, and the art members of Cranbrook Art Museum. So we're going to get started today with a presentation by Abel González Fernández, who's been my dear friend, and this has been a really great journey over the years, bringing these shows together. Abel González Fernández is a writer, curator, focusing on mid-century art and design and global contemporary art practices. González Fernández is the associate curator at MoCAD here in Detroit. That's also an interesting part of the story, is that we started in Havana and then Bell ends up moving here to our same city. He graduated from the Center of Curatorial Studies at Bard in 2023. Previous to MoCAD, he curated exhibitions in Havana, Berlin, Tokyo, and New York. In 2019, he was awarded the Prince Claude Next Generation Program Fund. In 2022 and 23, he curated Sin Authorization, Contemporary Cuban Art at the Wallet Gallery at Columbia University. As I said, he's my co-curator for Cuba Dispersa and the Modernist Regime upstairs, and he also contributed to the publication. He is a contributing writer and advisor for Latin American artists from 1785 to now, which was published by Fight and Press in 2023. I'm also going to do an introduction to Marco, who is going to follow him in giving a presentation on his work upstairs. Marco Castillo is a founder of the art collective Los Carpinteros, which started in 1992 and went to 2018. And his work is permeated with an interest in the history of Cuba and the country's post-revolutionary social and cultural exchanges. In tandem with the global movement of historical revision, Castillo reflects on Cuba's modernization in the 1960s and 70s and refers to influential Cuban artists, architects, and designers. Lately, the artist has been focused on interpreting the work of key figures from what he calls a forgotten generation. From a political standpoint, Castillo seeks to follow these artists' historic trajectory while positioning himself as an advocate and herald for Cuban artistic heritage. Castillo's work was represented in major national and international public and private collections, including the Tate Modern in London, the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, the Guggenheim, and the National Museum of Fine Arts in Havana, LACMA in California, and the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto. So please help me welcome Abel.
Well, thank you, Laura, for the amazing presentation, and thank you all here this afternoon that have come to see us and listen to us one more time. I want to say thank you also to Marco Castillo, a dear friend, mentor, that have worked with me very closely along 8 years to achieve this project, which is actually the larger project that I have curated and work, and one of my I would say is my main research in my curatorial career. And also I want to thank Detroit, Cranbrook Art Museum, and all the people in the staff who have made possible this incredible show, and we have been working side to side to, like Laila present here, to make this possible this afternoon. I want to start my presentation in 2016. There was a moment in Cuba. I'm talking about when Obama visited Havana in 2016. There's this aperture or this openness of the Cuban government, but the most important thing was that capital started flowing to Havana after many years of being closed for an international economy. And then one of the signifiers of that, capital flow to Havana, was the reopen or the reapproach to the cultural signifiers of Cuba before revolution. During the time of Pan-Americanism, this time in which Cuba had a very close economy with the U.S., actually with Detroit, being like the car industry a very important core of both economies. In 2016, following that kind of like recovering of the splendor of Havana and the Republic, for example, Chanel and Karl Lagerfeld, who was the designer at the time, did this parade in Havana that recovered all this classic cars, classic outfits from Havana in the 50s with the classic international cocktails, like from the provincial law time. There is a poster from the 30s and 40s that is by Massaguer, one of the most important designers that invites American tourists to come to Cuba. And again, the era of this free flow between both nations was activated. And along with that there was a fever for consuming like modern objects, either like furniture, painting, like I would say that all this past that was attached to the bourgeois style of life that came with the American way of life, but also with the Cuban upscale classes, was become like a very, very precious for certain like consumers, certain like buyers, certain like public, and that want to rebuild Havana in the way and in the manner of the pre-revolutionary time. And the first question that I ask myself is why this is happening, and what does these objects mean for the Cuban history. And then I started researching about this, like previous even to the design show that we did with Marco together. And I had this idea in my mind that I wanted to rebuild the context of many of these objects. And then at some point, this is my family house. This is my grandfather was an architect that was involved with this generation. He was part of actually this Pan-Americanist era. That's how actually my personal history kind of like overlap with the history of this show. He went to study here in Chicago. Then he came back because he had ideas of massive design for all. He was a leftist person. Most of his family actually they flee Cuba. He was one of the few family members who stay. And then he had this house that designed by Romagnach, and him, when he will place all these modern objects in a very eclectic environment, like mixing, the taste for like a classic indigenous craft from Latin America or Africa with modern design in the style of like MoMA or like the Modern Museum from that time. Also like a classic furniture you see there, like the womb chair that is covered with a blanket, but some like a Vienna or like a Vienna rocking chair. Tonnet, actually, it's a Tonnet rocking chair. There's some like a modern painting too. And I wanted to explore what was the meaning of this layout, what was the meaning of growing up in a space like this, and how many stories were this space were telling about Cuban history. And then I met Marco at some point. Of my life very early on. We become very good friends because I was doing curatorial work, and he was a very important artist for my generation and the generation before and the generation after. And then Marco just had purchased this house in the middle of this fever for like actually own like modern like architecture and own modern furniture. He bought this house that belongs to the doctor of Fidel Castro, that it was unfinished when the revolution came to the power in 1959. Didn't belong to the doctor of Fidel Castro, but it was unfinished, and then it was given to the doctor of Fidel Castro, and it was finished by a crew of architects in which my grandfather actually used to work. It was a group of architects that when the revolution came to the power, and many of the famous architects left, he stayed, and then they were kind of a lead architectural group that will work in a very specific works for the government that had the mission of keeping the taste of the Cuban modernist, classic modernism. And then we started like, hey, why don't we actually start researching about, he invited me to research about this kind of like architecture of enclosed spaces, because Cuba stopped, let's say, the building of big buildings and big projects, but they kind of renovate all the interiors of the old houses and the old buildings to accommodate the new high class of governors and people in the government. And that's what happened like with this house of the Fidel Castro doctor. And then I started this research. When I travel, I pulled the streams of my family like history. It was a total like oral history because there was no books, there was no like a publication. It was more like like a visit after visit after visit. It was a word of mouth like research. And then finally I was finding like archival materials, I was finding like certain objects, and every object that we discovered was like, wow, like this is something that, like came to light with this research. It was something like really, really incredible to have the opportunity to actually see a very excellent body of work for first time after being lost for 40 years. And then some of the furniture that we found in the renal show, like this one, we try to recreate some of the environments in which these like objects were actually shown originally. You can see other furniture that actually are not shown here because like we didn't have access to all the furniture that we had in Havana because belong to different collections or public collections that we could not like bring here. The layout also trying to incorporate architecture because one of actually the first show was called the Museum of the Machine. I had this thesis that these subjects were actually like small pieces in a larger system and machinery that it was called Modernist, which its goal was the full domination of nature to produce development in society. And each furniture was a synecdoche or like a metaphor of a system that goes from the smaller scale of architecture, furniture, design, interior design, to urbanism. And then these furniture actually carries with the ethos of a planifier or a master plan for the development of Cuba in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. And then in the same like spirit, we keep working actually with this legacy, and then in 2019, Marco and I organized two shows for the biennial. One was from a Rockefeller fan to a Khrushchev follower. I mentioned these shows because even when they are not, we didn't show like furniture objects. We wanted to explore the shift in design between the Pan-Americanism era and the Soviet era in the same country. What survived from the Pan-Americanism era and transferred to the Soviet era, and what was in the Soviet era that actually was present in the Pan-American one. And it was a way to approach the political history of Cuba through objecthood, materiality, and design. Marco Castillo has also La Casa del Decorador, Decorator Home. It was the first time that actually Marco presented this body of work that we are seeing today in the show. It was a body of work that was directly inspired by this furniture. And basically, Decorator Home was a show that displayed fictional objects that belong to one, like a fictional designer that lived during the Republic and transferred to the Revolution and evolved from a more like formalist, apolitical shapes related with actually very political in terms of like how democracy and form work at that time, and evolved to a more like figurative, like a Soviet political style with the weapons and the star, from the circle to the star, and this lattice that actually was designed by my grandfather, and Marco added some of the characters and made a piece with it. And just last thing that is more related with Cuba Dispersa, along with that, I had this also research in parallel, but also, in my career as a curator, I was working with artists from different generations, but also with contemporary artists that had engaged with the history of Cuba, with that history of modernism in a more political way, questioning the administration of the archive, how this archive are actually held by the government to build secrecy or to control the narrative of power. And then I pulled this image from the exhibition that I curated at the Walla Gallery because there's some of the artists here they're actually here in the show Cuba Dispersa, like Hamlet La Bastida, Celia also is over there, and Marco also had a book there, and the idea was to think about the legacies of like the modernism as a project to build a nation, and see how that project have been deformed or can be continued in order to build a locus that either Cuban from the island or Cuban from Miami or Cuban from Spain, Cuban in the diaspora can inhabit at something that belongs to them. Marco, you can come.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming here to see this conversation, this panel, and also for attending the exhibition. I'm especially happy for all this is going on here because this has been a passion that is being accumulated there for a long time, and it's the first time we see like an actual international show and exposure of all these ideas that were planted in Cuba in the 1960s. This utopia about changing the life of the people and the utopia that where I grew up. And I want to thank for that to Laura Mott, to Andrew, the director of the institution, and the institution and Cranbrook, Detroit in general, because it's, I think it's we opening today an important door for the knowledge of this generation of designers. So I'm gonna start with my lecture. I want to use the structure of the decorator homes, where Abel talk before. And the curator home was the first reaction of my work to this adventure of researching, collecting, making exhibition, taking the dust out of furnitures and documents to see what's going on in Cuba in this period in terms of design, because it was actually not very known. Nobody knew in Cuba anything about it, only few people, few designers from the Institute of Design, but it was really not a deep research about it. And especially all the objects were getting lost. They were getting destroyed, forgotten in time. And the fact that I was researching on that and restoring the furniture, breaking them to see how they were built, how they were constructed, and then gluing them again and polishing them again, and treating the materials, the fibers they use, I learned a lot, not only these political ideas that were behind the furniture, but also the technology, how they were built. So I had a reaction, I had a creative reaction. And the first thing I did was this exhibition, which was called the Curator Home. The Curator Home had the intention to, me to behave like a decorator of the time, interior design, someone that was in charge of furnituring hospital, schools, or offices for politicians, for ministers, for presidents, and the complexity this would carry. I put my mind. I tried to put my mind in the mind of a designer of the time, with all the political complexity that this could have, and trying to solve the problem, but also maybe being pressured by certain, surveillance of the typical surveillance of a country like Cuba, where it's very militarized and is very focused on the figure of a dictator. And here you see the image of the exhibition, how it looked in Havana. And I want to talk about this first series where I used the movement from the circle to the star. I thought it was interesting to talk about the mental evolution of the Cubans, where we come from a regular Latin American capitalist country, and then we become in few years in a socialist country with all the demand of a socialist country, where we have to share everything we have. There was no property, all the property were confiscated, and this evolution I kind of represented in this object, where we coming from the circle. Circle is a very simple figure that it could represent many things. It probably represent the era of the abstraction, the geometric abstraction, but also represent a circle, which is similar to a coin, to money, and which is when things are about money are simple in a way, but then it becoming in the star. No, this figure is all the time becoming. Is always traveling from the star to the circle, no? And then the star is a very complex figure that also not only represents the ideology, but also is represent all the complexity we live through, no? And it's a very complex also geometric figure. And then I play in different ways with that. The Maria Victoria series, I wanted to kind of take this distribution of the furniture in the house. I imagine this like looking from top, like a blueprint, and the organization of the furniture. No? And for me, it was very interesting. While this revolution was hiring all these reminding architects, intellectual, brilliant people to join the revolution and trying to change the life of the people, the real effect was that most of the people were leaving the country. Most of the people were getting spread out of the country. The families were broken, and I was fascinated by that idea, and I kind of represent it like this, like a furniture situation that is always going away from the center, no? This group of Maria Victoria. And I want to highlight the name of the pieces. Always, these pieces have a name I name it after the designer, but at the end of the day, this project have a reivindicatory mission also, no? We want to highlight, we want to bring to life all these figures that they were getting lost in time and knowledge. And so I had different examples. So this is another venue for the decorator home. It started in Havana, and then we did this show also in Mexico. I love to select places. This is an exhibition where I don't get selected by a curator. In this project, I select the places, and I try to form the team to work around this. In Havana, I worked with Abel González, but in Mexico, I worked with Dorothée Dupuy, which is a French curator that lives in Mexico, and she found this house for us. It's a house from 1959, the same year of the revolution happened in Cuba. And it's a house that has a lot of feelings, a flavor related to Cuba. But I wanted to show this exhibition in Mexico because one of the key figures of the Cuban design at the beginning was Clara Porcet. Clara Porcet is a very known designer from Mexico City. I mean, from Cuba, but she developed her career in Mexico. She was the fetish designer for Barragán, the Mexican architect. And she would be, I would say, one of the most important figures in the design of Latin America, together with Lina Bobardi from Brazil. And Clara Porcet, being Cuban and living in Mexico, having all this theory about design had to be a social thing, had to solve the tropical problem, but also the social problem. And she involved popular art also into design, and she wanted to bring this in 1959 to the revolution. So she went back to Cuba in the revolution. In the catalog, in the green catalog from Cranbrook, you can see her image arriving in Cuba for the first time after some years. And then she wanted to put the seed of the design. She was very involved in this very small team of people trying to decide what is the aesthetic of the revolution, how people should live, how people should sit, what is the size of the houses that people should have. And so this is the event we did in Mexico. And here we see more, this is a corrupted image. And this is the last Maria Victoria. All of these are going away from the centers, pieces of furniture and rattan. I have to say that rattan is, I use mahogany and rattan most of the time because these were the materials they were used in the modern time in Cuba, especially the revolution time, 60s and 70s. And the reason why mahogany and rattan is because there was no more other material to use. There were not steel, aluminum. There were not bent plywood or more industrial fibers, things like that. We didn't have that. It was a lot of lack of material, so it was very crafty. Caoba was a very nationalistic wood, and the Cuban mahogany is very special wood. Very used in all fashion furniture in 18th century. A lot of French and English furniture from the old times are made on, and Cuban mahogany was very valuable, and it's a wood that gets really dark with the time. And then rattan was obviously a very tropical fiber we use in Cuba, and then leather. So it was not a lot of materials available, so that gave a very modest, austere feeling to all these designs. So I wanted to talk about this. This is called Círculo Social, which is, in English would be a social cycle. in Cuba there was a lot of confiscation. They confiscated a lot of properties, and they confiscated all the private clubs, the jazz clubs, the tennis club, all these, let's say, reminding buildings for an era of capitalism and golf, cabaret, and they focus on a society with not so much fun, but being busy trying to build all this. And so all these beautiful buildings, they have to change missions, so they have to change the furnitures, and they have to change the decorations, and they have to change the object they put in the walls. So I imagine myself kind of what would I do if I would be a decorator all the time? How would I intervene in one of these buildings? So I created these pieces where are inspired in drink stirrers. So the thing to move your drink, no? And it was very typical at the time. The Cuban part of the propaganda was appropriating of the cocktails tradition, the folklore also, and certain values of the Cuban that we had already from the past. They put it related to their mission, and they almost wanted to delete the relationship with the past. So I created this very dynamic that reminds the cocktail stirrers, but also music notes and all that. I'm thinking myself on a decoration for a working class club. And then this is a lamp series. It's a little bit more reference to the certain Afro-Indo-Cuban influences that they were very much important at the time. They wanted to include all these reference from our ethnicity. They wanted to put it also in the quality of the design, and I don't want to explain all the works, but I wanted to go to this piece that we talked before. I use here a wood lattice that is very important, that Abel's grandfather was involved in the design of this. I make an appropriation, but it's not exactly the same. I make a lot of changes, but I add text to it. So I wanted to create some sort of a huge Scrabble. And I was thinking myself, this has a size, a smaller size. The original, they are huge. They were made for a place like this, where they were almost the size of this room. And this is where if the president of Poland would go to Cuba, or a minister from Russia would go to Cuba, they would make pictures of themselves there in front of this wood lattice. It was a very elegant room. What's the name of the room?
Convention Palace.
It's in the Convention Palace. It's an amazing architecture. It's such a beautiful building. And all these important people will go there to get the drink, to get received, to get the speech and stuff. And I was thinking a pervert designer trying to break the Cold War. Cuba was a very enclosed place. It was very difficult to send messages to abroad. I thought that was kind of an interesting place to put kind of encrypted messages. So that's why the whole Scrabble flavor that this work has, and the text. It doesn't say anything specific, but it could be coded if somebody wants. And there was also obviously an inspiration not only in interior design but also in the graphic design. Graphic design was very important at the time in the exhibition. You can see a lot of posters. This is only a small selection because it's a big thing in Cuba. Poster, obviously, propaganda, communication. They wanted to talk about the mission of the revolution. So I wanted to have a piece of intervention of this. And I created this group of pieces that has certain relations with graphic design. I don't make posters. I just absorb the power of the graphic design at certain elements, like the repetition, the arrows. They were making a lot of effect of futuristic effects because they wanted to talk about progress. No, always wanted to indicate progress. And this work, I had to try to say this quickly, is inspiring in a very particular feeling I have being a kid that grew up in dictatorship and being raised in dictatorship, but we didn't know it was dictatorship. We didn't know any other thing. And this is a very strange feeling only until I was already grown up after university, all this stuff. I kind of have to tell myself, hey, come on, I mean, I was somebody that grew up in dictatorship. I was affected by that, but I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to admit it somehow. So this work helped me to kind of clean this bad energy, that mixed feeling I have, where I caught, in this book that I made myself, I do the binding of the book, but I caught outside some kind of abstract or cryptic figures, but they always 9 figures because they come from always from where it's behind these figures is the word dictatorship. This is a dictatorship in Spanish. I really struggle to use the word dictatorship because I like my word to be more metaphoric and stuff, but I had to use it because I needed to solve this psychological problem. And so I made this, I cut page by page the evolution from the abstraction to dictatorship. So every hole outside communicate with a letter in the back. And I mean, this is the story about this book. And there is always the conflict of the curator or whoever buy this work, how they're going to install it. They're going to install it facing the beautiful abstract shape, or they wanted to show the word. And then this is a challenge I always leave to the curators that work with me, how they want to show it. In the work we have here, because it's sculptural, you can go around, but sometimes it's against the wall. And this group, I wanted to use the gun stocks. The gun stocks are the crafty part of the guns, and the part that is replaceable. So the metal part is the part that kills, but this part is the part that it has to be built over and over. So it's wood, it's crafty, it's organic. So I wanted to use only this part for my comment in the work here. I didn't want to use the metal part. So I use the gun stock as a material for a supposed decoration for something in these buildings they were building in the 60s in Cuba. So I wanted to use kind of op art, cinetic art, but using the ingredient of a gun stock, which is very difficult because it's organic figure, it's an organic shape, and normally op art or cinetic art is more geometric, very lines and very simple stuff. So I put myself in the challenge of designing these wall pieces and trying to get the maximum I could from moving them in the wall up and down, and this was in the exhibition in Mexico. We showed it in against the main road, and then it was beautiful because it doubled the effect. And this is another installations. And this one was the first. Obviously, you start with the more simple elements, but I like it very much. I like very much the power of get to do something with that. I had the idea, so I want to do op art with the gun stock, but I didn't know it was possible to do it. So I finally got the gun stocks, and as soon as I started organizing them, they worked. It was magic. It looked like dancers. It looks like a uniform people marching. I don't know. It has all this effect that we wanted to talk about. It's interesting to know that weapons and army and all these references were present in Cuba in dance, poetry, or literature, visual art, and a lot of ways possible, but never in decorative art. So I wanted to kind of put this rock in my foot. Again, another visuality of the Mexican show. So here is another group of work that derivate a little bit of the book, and I think it's the last piece, the last group of work, where I wanted to talk about the posters, but I took the idea of a poster, but I didn't want to make a bidimensional poster. I make a three-dimensional poster where I use paper, I use geometrical figures and things that I took from some other designs, and I just created like a low relief poster. A poster that doesn't have a text, it doesn't try to sell you anything. It's a poster that only is talking to your eyes and to your sensibility. And a poster that obviously we as Cuba, we are sick of posters. We are sick of getting ideas sold to us. So I wanted to work more in the sensorial field. And I think they accomplished very much the mission in all this. It's a series that sometimes I include text, but it's not clear what it says. And again, here it says somehow dictatorship in Spanish, but you feel it, but you don't read it. And this is there was a beautiful point that I really wanted to achieve with these letters. Oh, I forgot. This is the last, actually, group of work that I like to explain this work because it takes a little while for you to understand. And I like that from art. Sometimes you immediately read and understand what you're seeing, but in this case, it takes a little while. And these seconds until you understand the work, I love it, no? Because you're seeing actually two works in one work. And in this case, I discovered that cutting pages by pages, you can actually evolve from one shape to another shape. In the front, you have one shape. In the back, you have one shape. But also, you can do one letter and one letter in the back. But if you can do that, you can also write two words at the same time. Now, this is what's going on here. And it's an object that have two words at the same time. It's very difficult to find two words that have the same size of letters. And when you put it together, they mean something. They make a vibration. They tell you something. It's a very complicated, let's say, it's a very complicated process. I have notebooks with a lot of words, crazy amount of words, and I write the amount of letters they have. So I try always to match them, and it's a kind of an effort. But it's beautiful when you have a good match, like this one, which is populist and violence at the same time. The first time I did this exhibition was for KOV. It's a gallery in Berlin, and most of the whole show was text. A research I did about the complexity of the left in Latin America that is rising today. It's a very weird situation, what is going on today, where certain people are appropriating this romantic idea of the socialism, but they get complicated with narco traffic and they abuse the ideology and then we have here word like leftish, amateur. What is that, populist? And this is social ideals and narco states. And this is a very almost silly combination, which is Antifa and Ku Klux. I like to put them together and see what happened. I don't mean no one is better than the other one. I just like to create the vibrations. And And this is another work from the exhibition where I take a similar to a chair that is in the exhibition, but I use it as a cell to generate, I think it's time. I think I'm going to cut this quickly. And the video generation, you have to see it. I don't want to tell anything about the video because it's better to see it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco and Abel, so much. So we're going to sit down and have a little conversation, and we'll follow up with some questions. So joining myself, Abel, and Marco is Celia Irina González, who was born in Havana and currently lives and works in Mexico City. She holds a PhD in social anthropology from the Universidad Iberoamerica in Mexico City, and a master's in visual anthropology from Flaxo in Ecuador. She has participated in exhibitions in Arco Madrid, Columbia University, Jakarta Biennial, the Cuba Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, and the Lyon Biennial in France, amongst many others. In the exhibition upstairs, co-curated by myself and Abel, which features 6 new commissions, is titled Cuba Dispersa, or Cuba Dispersed. For this exhibition, she created a new work titled A Special Operation. It's a series that she's been working on, and for our show, she created a video based on a series of drawings of plants from around the world that she extracted from a manual titled Survival. The manual was published by the Armed Forces of Cuba, we think circa 1960s, with instructions for members of the special operations to survive in any environment. The narration is from the perspective of the plants themselves. They insist on their autonomy, and they explain they do not recognize themselves as plants of war. The impetus for the creation of such a manual exemplifies how Cuba was preparing for a global battle rooted in communism versus capitalism. So I asked everyone to join me on stage. Hello, testing. You turn your microphone on?
Yes, it's working.
Well, again, thank you for joining me and for the presentations, and thank you, Celia, for coming from Mexico City to join us and see the exhibition. So Marco, it was really great that you spoke about the process of your relationship to collecting the furniture. I titled the show The Hands of the Collector because it's such a tactile experience, your research. When I was in Havana, we were going through multiple locations of all of the furniture. Everything was in different kind of stages. Some things were completed, some things were just part of a chair or part of some other piece of furniture. Some of the material was damaged and some of it was being replaced. I think to start, since we're kind of talking about the contemporary moment, can you explain the process of collecting the furniture and how that's done for you? Because it's kind of ongoing.
But first, before collecting, is to know what is. Not to know. The first thing is to put a name behind the furniture, and that was the help of Abel. The first idea we had our names, because imagine this is our furniture we grew up with, but we didn't know what it was. They were there, and to try and put name behind this furniture was very difficult. That was the first thing, and then how to find the furniture. We have to kind of, in a way, we have to teach. Because I always like to buy old modern Cuban furniture from the 50s and stuff. So I knew people that they were already doing the search for that. And I talked to them, and I have to teach them what to find exactly. And they say, "Why do you want that? This is so ugly. This is communist." And I say, "Don't worry, find it for me." And this way we managed to find a lot of them. And there was also a exportation plan. Certain pieces were going to East Europe and to Paris, because there was a very special relationship with Paris. And we managed to find also furnitures in Europe. Furnitures in Europe are in better shape, because, I don't know, they were in the storage, I don't know, in people's houses, I don't know, Cubans, they were very poor people using the furniture, so they put it outside in the terrace. Some of them got deteriorated. So the process was kind of complex, and at the beginning we didn't know how to do it, but little by little we learned how to do it. And then the restoration part is another long story.
And Abel, do you want to speak a little bit about your grandfather and that process of collecting oral history?
For me, it was more about the research, I guess. I also, of course, grew up with some of the furniture that I didn't know where they come from. When at the moment of doing this research, my grandfather had passed. And then, again, this research was a way to encounter his legacy. There was also a legacy that was denied to me because there was a lot of secrecy about it. There was no documents. There was not like a registration. My grandmother was so jealous of, his archives and all this stuff. And of course, it was. It is the most important intellectual experience in my life in terms of finding something that is historical, that is canonical, that is very important, and at the same time is part of my family, but has been denied to me by the system. But I would say that the most important thing. I think one of the things that I want to highlight about this is, in the process, I realized also I get a strong awareness of what is the meaning of this political process called revolution, in Cuba, because I found that actually all these precious objects were built as a meaning of propaganda, and they were denied to the Cuban people actually because they stay in the upscale. There was a transfer of from upscale class capitalists. Landowners and business owners to basically bureaucrats or actual military military generals or this ruling class that was related with the fight in the war against Batista, which is the previous dictatorship before or president before Fidel Castro. And just to finish this idea. It was so important to see how these furniture also were pointing to the fallacy or to the were mining actually the history of socialism as something that was for all, that it was almost like a rhetoric function in a more authoritarian country,
So these objects really hold that contradiction.
Yeah, they hold that contradiction. They hold the contradiction of being designed for all, but actually not being actually designed for all. They hold the contradiction of, you can see the difference between the light industry and this mahogany these furniture were being sold in the Step Simon store in Paris. Step Simon store was the same store that sold Noguchi, Charles Perriand, Jean Prouvé, all the designers that we recognize as the masters of 20th century design. And nobody knew that they were the furniture that were being used by Fidel Castro himself. They kind of hide that story, in order to build propaganda about the welfare that the revolution were building for all. Yeah.
So I want to take us to, again, talking about how these objects were living today, talking about how this history, how to uncover it, in part because the way you explained it to me, the idea of authorship is a little bit an antithesis to how the government runs, which is everything's under a ministry, everything's done by the government, not by individuals, which is in part why Marco names these authors or the designers.
That was an important challenge because the idea of authorship is the idea of property. It's a grid, it's a semantic grid that you put an object. You have property, you kind of segment it, you attach one author to this, and then the Cuban government was very clear about which were the signifier from classic Marxist theory of capitalism, and authorship was one of those, style was one of those. I would say individuality was one of those. Abstract design was also one of those, more related with an apolitical expression or something that is actually very political. Yeah, and the first thing that they target was the capacity of these architects to sign the plans and to sign, these projects. Of course, they knew who they were, and they know, and they knew who designed which, or everything. But if you look through the archives, actually, many times you don't see this, the signing of the plans or something, but you know that they belong to that because you can trace the moment, you can trace the style, and you can trace the group of people that were working in different projects. Yeah.
Celia, as a social anthropologist, do you have some thoughts to share about this?
Well, thank you for having me here, Laura and Abel, the curators. I have one work, and it's the end of the exhibition. Like the exhibition, this is have 3 layers, and I think that it was a really good idea to have Cuba Dispersa, like this actual present moment of the condition, the situation of Cuban artists today. For example, Hamlet La Bastida is in the exile, like I'm living in Mexico, he's living in Germany. Luis Manuel Otero is the other artist who is next to my piece, is in jail, and he's going to be 2 more years. So this is a situation which is related with also graphic design. The works there are presented in this part of the exhibition, but also with this extreme situation of artists who are not living anymore in Cuba because of political position. And my piece is related with my father, who is a military, who is retired, but he was a founder of the Communist Party and the revolution. And I found in my home a book, who is a book designed for the militaries to survive in any environment. So for me it was really, this is impossible. You cannot put in a book all the plans and all you need to know to survive in the war. But it was interesting because it's a symptom of how Cuba tried and was part of this Cold War, going, for example, to Africa, to Angola, like Abel's fathers and my father, to fight in Africa and to expand ideologically a way of thinking during the 70s and the 80s. And how this way of thinking is related with nature and with another kind of beings in an instrumentalized way. It's like this is useful for war, and I don't care about this, what is around me. I just needed to make war. So right now I'm thinking it's really important to think in future from the Caribbean area, incorporating another kind of being, not just humans. And it's part of our military ideological way of thinking. Our education is focusing humans and focusing in a vertical way of thinking. So I think we need to start to fight this kind of education, this military education, from incorporating the other beings. And in the video, the plants are talking. They are found in the book, and they are seeing how militaries represent the nature and themselves, and they are laughing about this way of military representation they find in the book. So it's this voice, that's the plants talking to the audience and saying they don't recognize themselves in the book. So it's like...
I have a question for you, Celia, actually, that because your piece is so important, because when you're thinking what is modernism, is basically an international style that expanded as a way of colonialism too. But also its core, I would say, that is ideological core is its attempt to dominate nature, to control nature, to shape nature, to privilege human subjecthood, and not plants or not wood. I mean, strike all this mahogany, strike all these materials, build like design for all, centering the human as, you know, as the human necessity as something that should be solved with the resources coming from the nature. And then your work is in the center of like something that is underlying this exhibition, that is not about capital is good, common is wrong, common is good, capital is wrong. It's about thinking like in an horizontal way what is similar to different modernists. That is a mission of Cranbrook, you know, like to build these bridges between different cultural areas in order to think us as you know as one civilization, but also as a civilization that have a abstract nature for a long time. And it's also that's also an unsustainable like a model, you know, like Clara Porcel, for example. Just quick, she had this conference, one of the designers in the show, that is called the interior decorations, its adaptation to the tropics, when she proposed a more symbiotic design that instead of dominating nature, she will like interact with it, and she will incorporate like elements of design to allow nature to transpire with the house, you know, like the high windows, the long ceiling, like a different like fresh materials, not using cushions or like fabrics, also in like vegetal fiber to, you know, to like combat the heat. And then your work is like it's that moment when actually nature stop being like a resource and become alive. And I want you to talk more about that.
I think the future, and the present, what we are living right now, for example, the ecological disaster, the overheating of all of our cities, is the result of this way of relating with nature, not just in Cuba, in the world, but the people, the man and the white man and the straight man in the center has been really strong in our education in Cuba. I mean, we don't have a feminist movement in our country. We have been related with society in a really racist way. So it's not just, it's the otherness. I mean, what is in the center is not human being, it's a kind of human being. That is the correct human being. And in the case of Cuba, it's the revolutionary human being. Is the one who have the right to have a life. And the result is all this big migration in the present. The higher migration in the history of Cuba is happening now. So it's related with nature and with the way we are building society. And this is unsustainable. It's not possible to continue in this way. So I think my work is usually really direct and related with research and database. But now I wanted to think from the perspective of a plant and put myself in the video, like I'm also a part of the otherness. I'm a racialized woman, a Caribbean woman, and I wanted to be there, be one of them, being one of these plants who are represented in the book. So I think this is the only way not the only way, I don't want to be absolute, but I think that's the way I want to think in the future. Incorporated the point of view or other beings to recognize myself in another narrative different from this narrative of my own family, for example. So it's something that is not the state, that is not far away from me or from us. It's something that is part of our own family. Our family built the state, so it's not a history that is far from us. I don't know if...
Yeah, thank you.
That's great.
Thank you.
So this has been mentioned several times, the migration away from Cuba, and like what's happening, especially over the last few years. Even when we started, so when I was first in Cuba in 2017, the same year as like the beginning of my research, but I met a lot of the artists that are in the Generation video upstairs and part of Marco's show. Abel was also in that film. A couple of the artists in Cuba Dispersa were in that film. And even throughout the duration of the time we started this project, several of the artists had to leave Cuba or were imprisoned. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening in the current climate within Cuba for the intellectual and artistic community?
Okay. What happened, I started in 2016 when the capital was flowing to Cuba. There was a moment with the expansion of capital, it's also like civil society, like experimented sort of an activation, you know? There was independent spaces, there was access to international money support. There were also like a private economy functioning related with tourism, with American private businesses made person to person. There was an economy of art too. People start exposing their objects to more and more commercial opportunities, and then the Cuban government started feeling that they were losing power, what happened in Havana is it had been so long without accessing to make business and capitals that when you open a window that was it was huge. It was like everybody wanted to participate. Like artists engaged with that in different ways. Some of them engaged commercially, but some of them saw the opportunity to actually speak out about, using that support to speak out against the government and get a bigger public, and get international support. And then they target the artistic community because they were the one who carried the logos. They were the one carried the capacity to communicate and the speeches and the discourse. Were being designed actually within that community. And then there was the economic crash with the pandemic, the situation between Trump administration, the shift from Obama to Trump, the shift from Raul Castro to Diaz-Canel, who is the president that is a puppet, but also it's a very conservative government. And basically there was a couple of uprisings, protests, and more that I'm going to explain here because it's a long history. But they start targeting the community because they had the logos, and they also activate other people to speak out in Cuban society. And there was a big uprising in 2021 that actually happily was the same day that we opened the show, or that we did the opening reception, 11 July. And then many of these leaders or artists that were also leading a sort of a social practice that engaged with community, where they didn't want to give more room to them to express themselves, and then they just went to when things got really the heat really knock at their door. They just send all these people to jail, and some of those people, and of course, I'm going to finish with this idea, but the people who actually were incarcerated were the historically classes that have been exposed to systematic repression, like the black community, the black artists, the Movimiento San Isidro, that was one of the first black movement against the narrative of the revolution, and in the history of the last 60 years in Cuba, and other people went to exile. Some other people like me. I went out of Cuba. Many of my friends went out of Cuba. Some of the artists were incarcerated for a short period of time, and then they left. And some of them are still incarcerated. And those who actually had the worst part were the black bodies participating in this movement.
Thank you. I know that that's a lot of trying to condense everything that's been happening, but part of the reason why we were doing these shows is so people understand the narration of what's been happening in Cuba. I think it'd be nice to open up questions to the audience. I think. Raise your hand. You want a microphone? I know that oppression is really hard to follow up with. You can also ask more light-handed. But yeah, so I think that's one of the reasons why even what you see upstairs, we started with a collection of the furniture, and then you kind of evolve through time, through Marco kind of looking at that history, and then in Cuba Dispersa, understanding what the equivalency of those artists and designers today. And I think maybe the generation film is a nice way to, or do you want people? I mean, people want to see it, but it is something about the cycle of what the cyclical nature, what's happened in Cuba that's really fascinating, and contextualizing everything upstairs.
Yes, but the video generation started when I was going back from Madrid. Moving to Cuba because I thought things was going to change with the Obama president in Havana. I thought it was going to be a transition. So I met all this generation of artists, and I saw what's going on, and I said, this is a moment to make a movie that represents this cyclical killing of avant-garde and ideas of revolution, but I mean in a different tone of the 1959 revolution, and I saw this new generation operating like a real avant-garde. There was a clear avant-garde going on, so I decided to make a movie that they were dressing like intellectuals and artists from the 60s. And this first generation of the revolution, and at the end, what it was going to see or going to happen like a party or a getting together of intellectual friends, it becomes something terrible that I'm not going to say now, but you can see it in the movie. And this just represents this cyclical meat grinder of avant-garde that has been going on in Cuba in the last 62 years. And but at the end, it becomes some sort of like a premonition.
I say like an oracle.
Like oracle, you say oracle? Yeah. An oracle that was going to happen to this generation. This generation, they were living in Cuba, they were happy in Cuba, they were partying, enjoying, reading, and doing exhibition, but after the video, a lot of people went to jail, and a lot of people had been forced to be out of the country. A lot of people been outlanded. Outlanded is a term they use in the Roman time, because it doesn't happen in any country. Nobody is expelled out of their own country, so Cuba do that. And I think the video is becoming what it was supposed to be, just an experiment at the beginning, is somehow is becoming important because it's continuously telling more and more of what we are, who we are.
One of the things I really love that Abel said, which also kind of gives a little space of contextualization but optimism, is that when you don't have a land to share, when you build things like history, like the history upstairs, it creates a space for people to unite. Do you want to speak a little bit about that in finale?
Mostly the Cuban diaspora living in the States or Europe or Latin America or everywhere. As part of that diaspora, sometimes we don't have rights on the Cuban territory. We don't own Cuban territory. We are kind of like excluded from the narrative of like the nation or Cubanness, and it's not that I wanna have like a fixed identity. It's just that I want or it's not that I want to include actually this exhibition touch upon many international connections of of this furniture, including the Cranbrook one, and we want to offer a landscape of diversity, like internationality and more, that people with Cuban roots or people with living outside of Cuba, but people inside of Cuba also can claim as their own. Can see, hey, I'm Cuban, and despite the humiliation of coming from a country that have denied your citizenship or have denied your voice as someone has political power, you can actually inhabit this piece of history that represent one and many.
Do you have anything else you want to share? Okay. So if there aren't any questions, feel free to come and speak to us individually afterwards. I think we're right at time, so thank you so much, and please enjoy the shows upstairs. Thank you.